Have you ever been locked in a debate where the other person sounds convincing, yet you feel the conversation isn't actually moving forward? You are likely trapped in a logical fallacy known as arguing in a circle. This happens when an arguer tries to prove their point by simply asserting their conclusion right inside their premise. For any logical argument to actually work, it needs to bring in independent external evidence to support its claim. It has to pull from outside the initial statement. Looking at this diagram, you can see how a circular argument provides zero independent data. It is a completely closed loop. Stripped down to its logical structure, it is the mathematical equivalent of saying A is true because A is true. If the A equals A structure is so obviously flawed, why do so many smart people regularly fall for it in the real world? We get tricked because arguers rarely use the exact same words twice. They camouflage that hollow structure behind a thick smokescreen of synonyms and complex vocabulary. Let's look at a textbook example of how this works in practice. Someone might claim that using public school textbooks containing profane and obscene words is immoral. As you can see in this text block, their justification for that claim is because it is not right for our children to hear vulgar, disrespectful, and ugly words. Let's break down the illusion here. The word immoral in the conclusion means the exact same thing as the phrase not right in the premise, and profane and obscene is functionally identical to vulgar, disrespectful, and ugly. Despite the length of the sentence, the arguer hasn't provided a single piece of external evidence. The premise is just a thesaurus-driven restatement of the conclusion. A longer sentence doesn't guarantee a stronger argument. Excess vocabulary is routinely weaponized to hide a complete lack of foundational logic. This trick also happens in much shorter conversational statements. Imagine someone claiming that their college's administrative policies are highly paternalistic. When asked for actual evidence to back that up, they reply, because they treat the students like children. Treating students like children is not an independent piece of evidence proving the college's actions. Notice how this diagram directly equates the two. The speaker has bypassed providing evidence entirely and merely recited the literal dictionary definition of the word paternalistic. Defining your vocabulary is not the same thing as defending your claim. An argument without external proof is just an explanation of a word. To defeat circular reasoning in real time, you can use two specific diagnostic tools. The first is reconstruction into standard form. Looking at this layout, the process is straightforward. You strip away the emotional language and forcefully separate the premise into one box and the conclusion into another. When you place these two elements side by side in their most economical form, the repetitive structure often becomes so glaringly obvious that the argument simply self-destructs. But if your opponent still refuses to acknowledge the flaw, you can deploy the ultimate weapon, the absurd counterexample. To do this, you build a new argument using your opponent's exact structural pattern, but apply it to a completely silly subject. A classic application to use against someone arguing in a circle is to say, that is like arguing reading is fun because it brings me lots of enjoyment. By mirroring their logic with something so obvious, you force the arguer to admit that the A because A pattern cannot logically prove anything at all. True persuasion requires breaking out of the rhetorical loop. You have to ignore the smokescreen of synonyms and demand independent, external evidence.